Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into a world where winter isn't just a season, it's a survival challenge. You're about to learn how the Vikings, those legendary figures of the North, endured nights so frigid that even a modern space heater would struggle. We're talking about bone-chilling cold, snow that lingers for months, and winds so sharp they could slice through your thoughts. Honestly, you probably won't make it through this, but that's okay, that's what the blanket is for. Before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I share here. And let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm really curious about where in the world you're bundled up. Now, let's dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan to create a soft background noise. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You wake up in the middle of a frozen Scandinavian winter around 1875. Snow is piled up outside like a fortress built by nature. It's not just cold. It's why are my eyelashes stuck together? Cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your teeth. You're in Viking territory, where nights are long, sunlight is scarce, and the struggle against exposure is real. Outside your longhouse, the world is white and silent. Ice clings to everything, and snowdrifts are taller than your waist. The fjords are frozen over, and trees bow under the weight of icy branches. You can hear wolves in the distance, seems like the wind itself is hungry. And it kind of is. Yet inside, there's life. Thick smoke rises toward the rafters, escaping through small cracks in the ceiling. It smells like burning wood, boiling meat, and people. Warm bodies are packed together under layers of fur and wool. You find yourself on a shared bed platform, your feet tucked under your neighbor's arm. It's not optional, and there are at least a dozen of you under one big wool blanket. You try not to breathe too deeply. Let's just say the concept of deodorant hasn't been introduced yet. And still, it's warmer than you'd expect. That's not by chance. The Vikings were good at reading the land and building lives where it seemed impossible. You're in a longhouse, one of the key structures of a Viking farm. These houses might not be pretty, but they're smart. They're long and narrow with thick turf walls and slanted wooden roofs that resemble hobbit holes stretched into rectangles. The outer walls are packed with a mix of mud, manure, straw, and, well, insulation, depending on how you look at it. Keeping the cold out involves several factors. First, the animals, cows, pigs, goats. They don't just provide food, they also sleep nearby. Their body heat rises, seeps through the thin inner walls, and shares a bit of warmth with the humans. It's an uncomfortable kind of teamwork. If you've ever tried to sleep with a cow breathing heavy next to you, congratulations, you'd make a decent Viking. The heart of it all, right in the center of the longhouse, is the hearth, the fire that burns low and steady through the night and season. This isn't just a flickering candle, it's your lifeline. The fire is small because of smoke-controlled chimneys haven't been invented yet, but it's constant. If it goes out, someone could freeze to death in their sleep. If it smokes too much, you'll choke on soot by morning. Here's a surprising historical tidbit. These homes often had no real windows, just one small smoke hole in the roof, and maybe a door that lets in more wind than light. It's less about views and more about survival. Now, here's an interesting twist. You're surrounded by carved wooden posts, some of which aren't just for decoration. They might belong to your ancestors. Vikings believed that spirits lived on through certain sacred objects, and sometimes they built their homes around posts containing relics or even bone fragments. So, when you lean back against that wooden pillar for warmth, there's a chance it's part of Uncle Bjorn. Cozy, right? But scholars debate how common these warm, family-centered houses really were. Some think Viking society was more divided than we realize, meaning not everyone had access to a warm longhouse and well-fed animals. If you were less fortunate, your winter shelter might be more like a basic shed, with little insulation, fewer people to huddle with, and less food. If the wealthy had fire, others might just experience frostbite. Still, the clever use of community, warmth, crowded spaces, and resourcefulness helped these people thrive. They didn't just survive winters, they lived in them, celebrating birthdays, sharing jokes, having children, which isn't surprising when you have 16 hours of darkness too. Fill with family. Romantic, huh? But right now, you're still cold. Your breath fogs in front of you like a stubborn ghost. Somewhere, a child quietly cries in their sleep, likely dreaming of a summer that's still months away. The fire crackles. You try to shift positions, but your legs are tangled with someone's grandmother. Too bad. You close your eyes, tuck your nose into a scratchy wool corner, and wait for morning or at least for the darkness to lighten up a bit. Welcome to Viking winter. Wants to bother with the day. You're awake because someone got up to pee and stepped directly on your face. It's fine. You're a Viking now. You roll over, pull your foot from the tangled limbs of at least a stranger's, and grab the first available piece of clothing which smells like goat, or might actually be goat. Hard to say. Your boots are stiff with frost. Your breath still clouds in front of you. But you're alive, and that's something. Not everyone makes it through the night, especially when the temperature dips low enough to freeze boiling water in midair, which, yes, you'll get to try later if you're feeling brave. But right now, your survival depends on two things: keeping your heat in and keeping the cold out. That's where Viking architecture steps in to work its slow-burning magic. The longhouse is more than just a shelter. It's a living system. You notice it when you sit up, how low the ceiling feels, how the air is warmer just a few feet off the ground, and how everything is arranged around that long central hearth. It's not just for cooking. It's the sun you build your day around. Even now, an old woman is crouched over it, stirring a pot of thin porridge that smells like barley and desperation. There's no sugar, no cinnamon. This is the kind of breakfast you eat because it keeps your heart beating. As you move around, careful not to bump your head on the beams blackened with decades of smoke, you start to notice the layers. The long house walls aren't just wood. They're packed thick with turf and moss. Viking builders knew that insulation didn't have to look pretty. It just had to work. That moss you see poking out between the planks isn't decoration. It's stuffing. Think of it as prehistoric cork. It expands when wet, blocks drafts, and probably houses several confused insects trying to survive the winter with you. And then, there's the roof, angled low and heavy, sometimes with a thick layer of sod on top, weighed down with snow. You'd think snow would be a problem. But here's the twist: the snow helps. It acts like an extra blanket, trapping heat underneath, and keeping things a little warmer inside. It's the same principle as an igloo, but way smellier. One historical fact that often goes overlooked is how deliberate Viking home design really was. These weren't randomly built huts. The positioning of the longhouse, often aligned east to west, maximized the little bit of sunlight they got. The doors were small to reduce heat loss. And there were even interior divisions to keep the warmest parts for humans while animals stayed in colder but still protected areas. And let's not skip over the ceiling height. You're starting to feel it now, or how you can't quite stand up straight without ducking under a beam. That's by design. Heat rises. And in these low ceiling rooms, it doesn't have far to go. Instead of floating uselessly up into a vast chilly space, like in a cathedral or modern open floor home, the heat stays close. Close enough that you can feel it on your cheeks if you sit up near the fire. Close enough that your frost-nipped fingers might start tingling back to life if you wave them gently over the embers. But then there's the downside: smoke. You cough involuntarily as the wind outside shifts, and the smoke from the hearth backs up into the room. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Viking life was a constant negotiation with the elements. And this was one of those compromises. You either freeze or deal with smoke, or sometimes both. Some scholars argue that these smoky conditions may have helped preserve meat and even sanitize the space in a strange way, like a low-tech air purifier powered by lung damage. Others debate whether the respiratory problems were worth it. Archaeologists have found remains showing evidence of chronic sinus infections and lung issues, especially in the elderly. So, while the architecture kept you warm, it didn't guarantee you'd live to complain about the ventilation. Still, it beats freezing to death. If you're part of a wealthier household, you've got more than just smoke and packed moss going for you. You've got wooden planks on the floor instead of dirt and animal hides covering the walls. Some longhouses even had stone or brick fire pits to better contain and radiate heat. That's high-end Viking living. You, though, are working with a dirt floor, drafty wall, and mystery smells. But don't underestimate the power of body heat. Last night wasn't a fluke. Vikings didn't just sleep together for comfort. They did it because tight human bodies create a shared heat bubble. It's awkward, sure, and personal space isn't a thing. But when it's a matter of freezing alone or spooning with 3 generations of your neighbor's family, you make peace with it fast. You move closer to the hearth now, rubbing your hands together, eyes watering from the smoke. An old man to your left is sharpening a knife. A child on your right is poking the fire with a stick she's not supposed to have. You notice a row of Boots lined up near the door, stuffed with straw and herbs to keep them from stiffening completely. These people have learned how to live with winter, not just to endure it but to navigate it, inch by frozen inch. Some longhouses had built-in benches along the walls that doubled as beds, storage, and seating. You're sitting on one now, your backside slowly warming from a cushion that smells vaguely of sheep. Beneath you are likely some dried fish, a tangle of spare rope, and probably someone's winter socks. The Viking version of underbed storage. You glance toward the door. It's still shut tight, a heavy wood slab bolted from the inside. Going outside means facing the wind, the snow, and the constant risk of slipping on ice and getting hurt. It also means letting in a blast of air so cold it feels like a punishment from Odin himself. So for now, you stay put. Outside, the cold rages on. Inside, the heat barely holds. You shift closer to the fire and wrap a woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders. You listen to the sounds of your temporary home. Someone is humming. The pot bubbles gently. Snow hisses as it melts along the roofline. You're not exactly comfortable, but you're surviving. And in Viking country, that counts as a win. You're beginning to understand something important. If you want to get through this winter as a Viking, you can't just sit by the fire all day like a baked potato in a wool wrap. You've got to move, work, hunt, fix things, and look convincingly alive, even when every muscle in your body begs to crawl back under that communal fur heap. And if you're going to do that without your fingers turning black and falling off, you need the right clothes, which means layers. Lots of them. Viking winter fashion isn't about looking good. It's about not freezing to death. First you put on your undertunic, a long, itchy shirt made of coarse linen or wool. It feels scratchy, slightly damp, and oddly comforting. It's like a second skin. Over that, you wear your wool over tunic, thick and roughly stitched by hand. There's no fast fashion here, just slow, stubborn survival. For your legs, you wear woolen trousers, possibly lined with fur if you're lucky or well-connected. And your feet are stuffed into leather boots filled with hay, moss, or even bits of rabbit fur. Basically, anything that keeps the frost from biting straight through to your bones. You wrap a belt around your waist, not for style, but to hold your knife, your pouch of salt, and maybe a bone comb. Yes, a comb. Viking grooming wasn't completely non-existent. They might have smelled like wet goats, but they still hated tangled hair. Then there's your cloak. This is the MVP of Viking outerwear. Made of thick wool and fastened with a brooch, it drapes over your shoulders like a warm, socially acceptable blanket. If you're wealthy, it might be dyed with madderoo or covered in embroidery. If not, it's a sturdy brown that smells like the sheep it came from. Either way, it holds essential heat. You might also have mittens, thumbless and made of felted wool, or even fur-lined gloves, if someone in your household is skilled. And yes, they sometimes wear hats, not the horned kind. Please let that myth go. But rounded wool caps or fur-lined hoods that hug the ears like survival helmets. Here's the quirky part. They didn't wash these clothes very often. Not because they didn't care about cleanliness though. Let's be honest, hygiene was relative, but because water freezes. An icy laundry day is not ideal. So instead of washing, they aired their clothes out, smoked them by the hearth, and sometimes rubbed them with snow to clean them. If you're thinking this sounds like rolling around in frozen dirt, you're not entirely wrong. In fact, one preserved Viking garment discovered in a bog had heavy stains around the armpits and collar. This shows that, yes, these outfits were worn hard and cleaned rarely. But when you're living in a world where snow drifts are taller than your child, and the sun shows up for about 6 hours a day, smelling like a fermented sheep blanket isn't your biggest problem. Still, there's a scholarly debate that keeps things interesting. Some researchers argue that Viking clothing was much more colorful and decorative than we assume. Dyes made from berries, roots, and lichens could create reds, yellows, greens, and even purples. So, yes, while you might think every Viking looked like a background character from a grim Nordic noir series, some may have actually worn bright tunics and striped leg wrappings like medieval peacocks. Others counter this view by pointing out how rare and labor-intensive dyes were, especially in winter, suggesting that most people probably dressed like earth-tone potatoes. Right now, you're wearing whatever you could find from the shared family pile, and you're thankful for every inch of warmth. The cloak smells like someone else's sweat. The mittens are to different sizes. One boot has a hole in it plugged with dried moss. You don't care. You're layered up and a bit more ready for what lies beyond the longhouse door, Stepping outside feels like being punched in the foot by ice. The wind slices sideways, driving tiny shards of snow into your exposed cheeks. You turn your face down, letting your hood catch the worst of it. The ground crunches beneath your boots, a mix of frozen dirt, packed snow, and bits of brittle hay that escaped from the stable. You trudge past the animals, cows huffing out plumes of breath like angry steam engines, goats bleating as they huddle together for warmth. If you're lucky, your household has a spare building, a small outbuilding, where clothes are stored, food is dried, and sometimes garments are sewn. Inside, a woman sits by a small fire, spinning wool with frozen fingers. Her spindle turns with rhythmic patience. The thread that comes from it will be knit into socks, tunics, cloaks, anything to wrap the body in another layer of warmth. Spinning wool isn't glamorous, but without her, you'd be in trouble by next week. You nod your thanks. She barely looks up. There's too much to do. Back inside the longhouse, you peel off your outer cloak and shake off the snow, watching steam rise from your shoulders like you've just escaped the cold. Underworld. Your boots go by the fire to Thor. Someone throws you a piece of dry bread to munch on, which is about as close to a snack as you'll get before supper. You wrap yourself in a blanket, sit back on the bench, and take a deep breath, thankful to be warmer than the outside. Here's a little historical tidbit. Wool was everything. The Vikings valued sheep for more than just meat. Wool was useful, strong, and warm, even when it got wet. Viking women were skilled at textile work, spinning and weaving all year, often making enough extra to trade. Textiles acted as a form of currency. Cloaks, tunics, and mittens could be exchanged like coins. In winter, having extra clothing wasn't just nice. It was wealth. It was survival. You catch your reflection in a dark piece of metal. Your hair is matted, your cheeks are windburned, and your nose is running from the cold. Congratulations. You look exactly how you should. You're dressed to survive in a world that doesn't care if you make it through the night. And now you realize something important. Warmth isn't just about fire. It's about the fabric and layers of scratchy wool that make you look like a very stressed bear. The cold pushes against the walls again, as if waiting for you to slip up. You won't. You're layered, bundled, and slightly damp, but still standing. In this part of the world, that's about as good as it gets. By now, your face has thawed enough to feel the itch where your hood rubbed against your skin, and your stomach starts to protest this whole barley porridge and air diet you've been on. You glance towards the hearth, where someone scrapes the bottom of a pot with a carved wooden spoon, as if trying to coax flavor from the ash. You're not alone. Everyone is hungry. In Viking winter, feeding yourself is a full-time job, and it's not an easy one. Food in these months isn't about enjoyment. It's about fuel. The kind of fuel that keeps your body warm and gives you enough energy to slog through a snow-covered world. That means fat. Lots of it. You've probably never been so grateful to see congealed bacon grease in your life. In Viking winter, calories are gold. The foods that stick to your ribs, like meat, lard, butter, and cheese, are what keep you upright when the cold wants to turn you into a Norse popsicle. Today's meal? You're lucky. A thick stew made from salted mutton, dried beans, and root vegetables that were buried deep in the earth before it froze solid. A bit of onion if it hasn't molded. Definitely some turnip and fat, glorious animal fat floating on top in shimmering blobs that coat your throat like a scarf from the inside. You dip a piece of flatbread into the stew and try to ignore the faint taste of smoke and dirt. You chew slowly. Every bite matters. Meat doesn't come easy. Hunting in winter is risky. Most game has either moved away, hidden, or turned lean and desperate, just like the people chasing them. That's why the meat you're eating now is likely preserved weeks or even months ago. Salted, dried, smoked, or fermented, whatever it took to keep it edible. There's a hanging rack in the corner of the longhouse where strips of dried fish dangle like prehistoric jerky. They smell bad but taste like survival. Then there's the fermented stuff. Vikings didn't have refrigerators, so they got creative. This meant burying fish underground in pits, letting them rot just enough to become edible. Lutefisk, anyone? It's the culinary equivalent of a dare. And yes, it's real. Some scholars think these fermentation methods weren't just desperate meals. They were delicacies, a twisted badge of honor. You eat it, you live, you brag. Others debate whether the average Viking actually ate this regularly or if it was more of a last resort when the salted meat ran out. And of course, no Viking meal is complete without a good drink of mead or at least ale. Water in winter could be dangerous. Rivers freeze, wells get muddy, and snow is cold. But who knows what was buried in that drift last week? So, they drank fermented beverages, low alcohol ale made from barley, sometimes flavored with herbs or berries, mead if they were feeling fancy, made from fermented honey, not strong enough to get blackout drunk, but just enough to forget that you can't feel your toes. One historical fact you might find surprising: Viking diets were more balanced for the time than you'd think. Archaeological digs show traces of grains, nuts, legumes, and vegetables. They knew how to grow, store, and dry food. Sure, winter made it harder, but they planned ahead. They had root cellars, cool, dark holes dug into the earth where potatoes, onions, and other root vegetables could be stored for months. Some even had small granaries to protect grain from moisture and rodents. You get up from your seat, licking stew from your fingers, and step outside again, this time to fetch more firewood. Your cloak flaps in the wind like a disappointed ghost. The woodpile is half buried in snow, and your fingers ache as you pick up a frozen log. But the fire inside the longhouse won't feed itself. You drag back a few pieces, drop them by the hearth, and reward yourself with another piece of bread. Chewy, a bit burnt, and hard enough to serve as a self-defense weapon. Fun fact: some Vikings added crush bones or tree bark to their bread when flour was scarce. Technically edible, but mostly regrettable, it kept their stomachs from growling too loudly. When the real food ran low, and it will run low, that's the most frightening truth about Viking winter. No matter how carefully you store, dry, preserve, or ferment, you're racing against time. Each meal depletes your stockpile. Each blizzard delays a hunting trip. Each broken tool or dead animal pushes you closer to disaster. That's why meals are eaten slowly and with respect. Not because they're sacred, though sometimes they are, but because each bite contributes to your survival. There's a sense of intimacy to it too. Eating by firelight, passing bowls back and forth, sharing scraps, sucking marrow from bones while someone hums an old tune you barely remember. There's no idea of personal plates. One big pot, many spoons, one loaf of bread, many hands, and someone is always watching, quietly counting how many rations are left and how many mouths must be fed tomorrow. Even now, back near the hearth, you can hear two elders whispering over a tally stick. It's not just gossip. They're doing simple, hard math. How many days until the root cellar is empty? How many jars of preserved butter? How many people can get sick before everything falls apart? You take one last sip of ale, let it sit warm in your belly, and lean back, full for now and satisfied for tonight, but always aware that winter is just getting started. Outside, snow falls silently, covering the world in a kind of deadly calm. Inside, bellies are full, the fire burns steadily, and the cold still knocks politely at the door. So, you wrap yourself tighter, sink a little deeper into your furs, and prepare for tomorrow's battle with the cold. Because no matter how clever the cooking, how well preserved the meat, or how hearty the stew, winter is still winning, and it always wants more. The fire has been burning low for a while now, but no one dares let it go out, even if the heat barely makes the room above freezing. That little orange glow is everything. It flickers against the smoke-stained rafters, casting shadows that move, like ancient spirits dancing in slow motion. You sit close, elbows on your knees, feeling the ache that comes not from working too hard, but from simply staying alive. This is the Viking hearth, not just a fire pit. It's the heart, the pulse, the sacred core. And sacred is the right word. You begin to realize that in a place where winter can break a person, fire isn't just warmth. It's ritual, it's myth, it's how the world continues. The hearth isn't something to take lightly. It's watched, respected, and even spoken to in some homes. You've seen how the old woman stirs the stick clockwise, mumbling to herself. You thought she was losing her mind. She's not. She's preserving a tradition where fire listens. In Norse mythology, fire isn't just an element. It's a force with its own will. There's Logi, the fire giant, who once battled Loki in a contest of consumption and won by eating not only the meat, but the bones and the plate too. That's not just a story. It's a metaphor for fire's hunger. It devours everything, if you let it. So, you respect it, manage it, and never let it die while the snow still falls. Each morning, the hearth must be carefully revived using embers banked in ash overnight. You saw it earlier, how the firekeeper used a long iron poker to push back the white dust and find the soft orange glow beneath. Then came moss, dry bark, maybe a hint of straw, and then breath. That slow, careful blowing is like waking a god. from sleep. There's a strange intimacy to it. You think about all the people who have sat right where you're sitting, hands outstretched, watching their fingers come back from the brink of frostbite. The fire gives you back your warmth. You owe it. Even the design of the longhouse shows just how central this fire is. Everything radiates from it. Sleeping areas, benches, food storage. It's the pull that organizes the room. People move around it all day, cooking, sewing, carving, repairing. At night, the fire becomes a nightlight, a guardian. It keeps shadows at bay. Not just the physical ones, but the darker things your ancestors whispered about when they thought the cold was listening. Here's a fun little fact. Some Viking families believed in hearth spirits, tiny, invisible guardians that lived in the fire and watched over the home. If the fire went out unexpectedly or burned too low, it was seen as a bad sign, maybe even a warning that someone in the family would fall ill or die. So, it wasn't just about staying warm. It was about staying safe. If something unusual happened, in the fire's glow, people paid attention. Now, there's a bit of debate about how symbolic the hearth really was in everyday Viking life. Some historians argue it was just practical. Fire equals warmth. End of story. Others suggest the hearth represented continuity between generations, the line between chaos and order, even between this world and the next. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Because when it's 20 degrees outside and the wind sounds like it's trying to chew through your door, even the most practical person starts whispering to the flames. And let's not forget the practical side. Fire doesn't just appear. Someone has to gather the fuel. Every day, usually the younger, healthier members of the household go out into the snow to collect wood, chop logs, and sometimes even dig out the coal pit if the weather allows. If the snow is too deep, they dig down to the firewood pile, which has been buried to protect it from moisture. You remember how your fingers felt earlier?